founder of the Women's Alzheimer's Movement, Maria Shriver.
Alzheimer's discriminates against women. More women have it than men, and very few women realize that they're vulnerable. So the Women's Alzheimer's Movement is really a clarion call to women to get their health in check starting in their 30s, their 40s, 50s, and beyond. Women haven't traditionally been looked at as different from men, and so women are different. Their bodies begin to change in puberty, then you add childbirth, then they're perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal, and so women need to become their own warriors for themselves.
And less than 1% of the population develops Alzheimer's because of genetic mutations.
That's a big headline. People think, oh, it runs in my family, I'm gonna get it, or people think it doesn't run in my family, so I'm not vulnerable.
Your lifestyle really has a huge impact on the health of your brain and Alzheimer's risk.
There were so many takeaways from the panel discussion today, but one of them was that women of any age, you can really start taking action now. While this isn't a curable disease, this is something that there are, as you call them, some of those needle movers that we can really take control of.
There's so many things that not only impact your heart health, your physical health, but your cognitive health, in terms of whether you're in community, in terms of how you move, in terms of how you sleep, in terms of whether you meditate or not, in terms of what you eat.
A Mediterranean diet, lots of vegetables, lots of diversity of species, lots of fruits, getting anti-inflammatory meats and proteins. When you combine that with intermittent fasting, that I find to be very effective for the female brain. But it turns out there's quite a cost to high stress. It shrinks the brain. And of course, the solutions, there's a lot of them. Prayer, meditation, yoga, and girlfriends, especially being around benevolent women. Turns out that being around men isn't as good for the stress response.
I could have told you that years ago.
That all of these things that you all are mentioning, particularly stress, social isolation, skin hunger, anything that separates us from each other, this divisiveness that we see in our current climate, that's bad for our brains. And lack of touch is one of the components of social isolation that is really damaging for your brain.
There is no substitute, right, for connection. I think we are living in a time when people of all ages crave connection. We think connection is in our smartphone, but human connection, gathering around tables, bringing the elders, the matriarchs, the patriarchs into the family, and making an example to our family about how we consider family. How do we want to age? What do we expect families to take on? Very few American families have the savings to deal with a loved one who gets Alzheimer's. It's a mind-blowing disease, not just for the person who gets it, but the entire family is impacted. People have to shift their own lives in order to care. It's a financial shift, an emotional shift.
Sometimes you feel so stressed and so overwhelmed because you don't have enough estrogen in your brain. Like, that's part of the reason here. I think that's why so many women have anxiety and depression starting in their 40s. Estradiol makes serotonin in the brain. If you don't have enough of it and you start to forget things, you get overwhelmed more easily and you're anxious and then you're depressed, it's harder to cope with all those things that you have on your plate.
That's right, and if you're living in a society that tells you this is what you're supposed to experience, then it's fertile soil. And you don't know any better. And I'm sorry, I'm not willing to accept that, and we deserve better.
Amen.
Women are 2/3 of the caregivers. That also impacts their health. They're also the people on deck to help their parents. So I'm hopeful that the Women's Alzheimer's Movement will push doctors to be better educated about women's health, and particularly women's brain health. I'm hopeful it will push political leaders to make caregiving and Alzheimer's research and funding for it a priority and a national issue, and just to begin to get women to go to their doctors and start asking about their cognitive health will be a huge step forward.
To find out more about her effort, visit the Women's Alzheimer's Movement.org. Alzheimer's and dementia impact the whole family. Before and soon after diagnosis, it's difficult to see loved ones acting irrationally, paranoid, and even hurtful. And when the disease really sets in, family members often feel pressured to make important decisions in a world where they feel lost and overwhelmed. To lift this burden is the Alzheimer's Association. And with us now is Taylor Lee with the Greater Richmond chapter. Thank you so much for coming in today. Of course. What are some of the behavior and personality changes that families will see?
Absolutely. So a common behavior is memory loss. So they may be forgetful, they may need to rely solely on memory aids or even others. They may also be very repetitive in their speech. They may also have challenges with problem solving, so having difficulty with numbers, so using money, budgeting, or doing familiar tasks such as following a recipe or things of that nature. But more commonly, they may have a change in their personality, so that may invoke some confusion, agitation, and even things like depression. Is very common for individuals who experience dementia.
I've heard from so many people too that anger is often a part of it, and something like simply missing a dinner date could be a huge conflict for a family.
Absolutely. So they have an inability to regulate the passage of time, which makes it very difficult for them to keep up with current events. So for them, if they're trying really hard to hold on to something and then they lose it, that could be very frustrating. And so they may take that out on family members and things of that nature, where they will feel like it's their fault, but it's because they have the lack of understanding that it is because of their memory loss or symptoms with dementia.
It is so difficult for families to make that decision, but when is it time to seek a diagnosis?
As soon as you see signs. Early detection is the best detection. So if you experience any signs, whether it having to be with memory loss, behaviors, judgment, or even physical symptoms with having difficulty maintaining activities of daily living, such as bathing, dressing, toileting. If you experience any of those challenges, you should seek help from a doctor.
And then when you get that diagnosis, plan. I'm sure you have so much to do for the future.
Absolutely.
How do you guide folks through that process?
Well, we encourage them to reach out to the Alzheimer's Association, because that's exactly what we do. We work on helping them to identify what are some of their current challenges as of now, but also helping them to plan for the future. So whether that may be legal and financial, thinking about where they may be living in the future, all of that stuff plays a role, and we want to make sure that we are helping individuals make that decision early so that it can be an informed decision.
And I know that it can be so frustrating for families how to effectively communicate and be as sensitive as possible. How is that possible? How do you reach that individual with Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. As family members or caregivers, we have to work to not correct, and we have to work on really validating them at whatever process of the disease that they are in. Many of us, we are trying to be fixers, and so our goal is to bring that person back into our reality or help them to think logically. But that is what is significantly being impaired. So our goal, or the most effective way to communicate with them, is to use validation. And so the way that we use validation is that we honor where they are in their process. So go to them in their reality. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to say that what they're saying is correct. We may just need to say, I understand how you're feeling, and use that to redirect. You may also use that as a way to ask probing questions to figure out exactly why they're acting that way. So for instance, they may be asking about a loved one who has passed away, or they may feel like they are a teenager or a child. And so what we want to do is figure out exactly where they are so we can support them in that time. So where do you think you are? Why do you need that person? Who do you think I am? And things of that nature, so we can really work to meet them where they are and validate where they are instead of correcting them, which is not effective at all.
And just quickly, there are so many resources that the Alzheimer's Association offers families. Talk about the memory cafes and some of the support groups where folks can lean on others going through their same path.
Absolutely. Support groups are very beneficial as they provide support to caregivers. And many of our support groups are for caregivers, but we have a number of support groups that are for both the caregiver and the person living with dementia. And typically this is seen for individuals who are in earlier stages, but it gives them a way to really realize that it's not a a challenge that only affects them, but it affects others as well. And we also have memory cafes, as you mentioned, where it's a way to kind of provide some socialization. So we provide education, but we're really increasing socialization, which is aiding to their ability to live well with this disease.
It is such important information. Thank you so much for offering some insight today. And for more information on support groups and resources, go to alz.org. Also, people with Alzheimer's and progressive dementias have conditions for which there are no curative therapies, so they could be eligible for a wide array of beneficial hospice care services. Call any hospice care provider for more information.